Hi, I'm Deboki and this is Okie Dokie Boki, and today I'm going to be doing a recent science reads. This is a not particularly regular feature on this channel where I just talk about some recent sciencey articles that I've read, things that I have engaged with that as someone who thinks about science a lot, that have been things that I've learned from or found really interesting or found really well written or explain something really well, and that I think that other people might be interested in as well. Part of the reason why I think I've kind of put off doing one of these videos for a while is honestly because the big sciencey thing to talk about is COVID, and just over the past few months there has been so much news stuff cycling out that it's been a little bit hard to sort of quickly process what it is I would want to share with people. And there's a lot of really great science journalists who are doing that basically on a constant basis and who are figuring out who to talk to, what kind of information to share, how to share it, but just it felt very much like whatever I was going to pick out that would be COVID related would feel outdated in a month. And even originally when I planned out this video, I wasn't going to talk about anything COVID related. Okay, that's actually not completely true, because when I was initially drafting up this video, I had 5 paragraphs of explanation about why I wasn't talking about COVID, but also all of the things I wanted to say about COVID. But anyways, the point is that there has been some exciting news on the vaccine front. And so I know that that is a thing that I think a lot of people are thinking about now in terms of okay, well, now that there's been some companies that are announcing some promising results, what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of the big picture? What does that mean for me? All of these different questions. So I am just gonna quickly then recommend 2 articles related to stuff that's happening on the vaccine front. For those of you who haven't been keeping track of the COVID vaccine news, which is honestly kind of understandable because like I said, there's been a lot of COVID news in general, but Pfizer and Moderna, as of today's the 19th of November, they've announced initially promising results from their clinical trials in terms of both efficacy and safety. And so that has been stuff that people have been talking about in terms of, okay, it looks like we are making progress on the vaccine front. And just to get a personal bias out of the way, when I was a kid, my dad worked for a pharmaceutical company. He worked on making vaccines. So I grew up with what I think is a very healthy love for vaccines and the immune system and Jonas Salk. And because of that bias, I think it is really useful to understand how vaccines are tested, how we understand their safety and efficacy, and what kind of results scientists and regulators and doctors are looking at to understand what it is this vaccine does and how it does it. So there are plenty of places where if you just kind of want to get that press release restated sort of accounting of this is what Pfizer and Moderna are saying about their vaccines, plenty of places to read that, but I want to recommend 2 articles that if you want to understand a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of the vaccines, that you'll be able to get that. So the first article I'm going to recommend is by Sarah Zhang at The Atlantic, titled "The Vaccine News That Really Matters." This article was actually published October 19th, so it was before Pfizer and Moderna announced their result, but I think it's a really useful overview of the different phases of clinical trials that are going on and what kind of results people involved in the trials and people outside of the trials are all looking for. And so if you want to understand, you've been hearing things about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. If you want to understand more about what those each mean, I would recommend that article for understanding that aspect of all of these clinical trials. And if you read that and you want to kind of then understand the next level of what's going on, or you're just really curious about sort of the specific technical analysis going into these vaccines, I would recommend this post called "Moderna's Vaccine Efficacy Readout" from Derek Lowe's blog In the Pipeline, which he writes for Science Translational Medicine. And he published this on November 16th, 2020. In the post, he breaks down different points that stood out for him from Moderna's mRNA vaccine study, including notes on the safety as well as the storage. And he also gets into a little bit more of the big picture view of how to compare all of these different vaccine candidates that these different companies are putting out. And I'm recommending this one article from both of these people, but they've both written other things about that vaccine that I found very useful. And I also will say that if you're looking to understand a little bit more about that pharma development process, I think Derek Lowe's blog in general is super useful for that. That is a little bit of kind of the focus. It's it's called In the Pipeline. And also I should say, this vaccine news, there's a lot of reasons why people are excited about it, but we still even if everything goes according to plan with these vaccines, we still have a ways to go. There's a lot to figure out in terms of regulations and distribution, but still this is exciting. And there's reason to be hopeful, but also the best testament to that hope is to continue being careful and responsible now to the best of your ability, which involves things like wearing masks, social distancing, and especially here in the US, case counts are getting worse right now, and with the winter and holidays, experts have been predicting for a while that winter is going to be pretty brutal for COVID. And there's a lot that I could say about the role of government in this and the role of our leaders, and particularly the failure of leadership that I feel has really made this pandemic even worse than it like should have been, and so much more destructive to people's lives, whether or not they've been directly affected by the virus. So there's a lot that I could say about that, but like the extent to which we like as individuals have things that are under our control, those things are still our responsibility. And so the things that we can do to protect ourselves, to protect others, and especially to protect people who are like essential workers or who are working in healthcare, like those are still things that we need to do to the best of our ability with the choices that we have available to us. So I am now going to completely like change the mood in here. We're gonna get a little bit lighter. We're not gonna talk about COVID. What we're gonna talk about are dinosaur buttholes. So we're gonna talk about this article called "We Finally Know What a Dinosaur Butthole Looks Like," which was published in Slate on October 21st, and it was written by Arlie Black. In my recent Q&A video, I mentioned that I have been developing an obsession with butthole evolution, and maybe you watched that Q&A and you were like, cool, this seems like a funny fact about Deboki. I'm never gonna hear about this again. You're wrong, because it turns out other people are also obsessed with butthole evolution. I am not alone in this. Apparently, Arlie Black has been wanting to know what a dinosaur butthole looks for a long time, and thanks to a recent fossil in an unreviewed paper, we might be starting to learn what a dinosaur butthole looks like. In this article, Black gets into what was actually found, which was potentially a dinosaur cloaca, which cloacas are different than anuses. This is why I tend to use the word butthole, because I think it's a little bit more inclusive of all of the different types of digestive exits that animals have in the wild. But so cloacas are basically a little bit more multi-purpose. There's a lot of things that come out of them. This is part of why butthole evolution is so fascinating, because different animals approach it in different ways, and it's so weird and cool. And so in this article, Black gets into more of like what this dinosaur fossil cloaca means. Like how much can we tell from it? How much can we not tell from it? What it would mean for like dinosaur life and reproduction. And so I just highly recommend it, not just because I'm obsessed with butthole like evolution and will feel less alone with this, like if other people get obsessed with it, but also just because I think it's a really delightful article and it just like brought so much joy to my life. Next up, I have a newsletter post, actually, not an article. I don't know what I'm supposed to call them. Like, what do you call a newsletter? But the newsletter feels like it's the big overarching newsletter. Okay, whatever. The point is that I have like a post from a newsletter. And the post is titled "All Together Now, Science is Political." This was written by Audra Wolf for the newsletter Never Just Science, and it was published on October 27th. So this came out before the election, and in the post, Wolf is comparing the statements put out by two different science publications regarding the election, and particularly these two posts were endorsing Joe Biden. I think like over the last few years, over the Trump presidency, with the March for Science, with a lot of other things that have gone on, this notion that science is political is a thing that like people have kind of come to understand better and come to embrace more. It's a statement that I see like being used a lot more. And so I think what it's getting at more broadly, to me at least, is this idea that like you cannot separate science entirely from human politics. These things are completely intertwined because scientists are humans, and you cannot treat science then as a completely separate endeavor from like the human experience. And so that means like, science is going to be informed by the way humans are living and the way that we have our own biases, our own, like, I don't know, beliefs or whatever. Like these things are going to affect the way that we do science. But while that's what science is political means to me, it is still a very broad thing to say. And so it can end up actually meaning different things depending on who you talk to. And so in this post, Wolf is breaking down the statements that two places, so the publication Scientific American and then the journal Nature, put out in their endorsements of Joe Biden, which were very unusual when they came out. I think it was the first time Scientific American had ever endorsed a presidential candidate, I want to say. And so the goal of this post that Wolf is putting out is to actually like see, okay, what is it that these different institutions are saying in regards to how science relates to politics, and to discuss kind of like how their views fit in with our understanding of like power and expertise and equity, and like how all of that connects back to science. And spoiler alert, there are nuances and differences, and if you're like me and also like Wolf, you might end up more frustrated with one endorsement than the other. And so I really appreciated this post because I think think, you know, ostensibly I agreed with both Nature and Scientific American in the fact that they were endorsing Joe Biden, but the ways in which they're endorsing them are still important because they're going to have implications that go beyond the scope of the election itself. And I think it's useful to like look at the specifics of their language so that we understand where we agree and don't agree. One thing that I found interesting that's not really discussed in this article, which I understand because I'm not sure where you would go with it, but Scientific American and Nature, the two like organizations that are being compared here, they're both part of Springer Nature. Like they are like somewhat connected in that way. So they are their own entities, but they still have like this kind of loose overarching connection. So it's kind of like that kind of for me added a little bit of an interesting character, I guess, to understanding the different ways that they are like expressing their viewpoint and the ways that like they seem to be expressing the role of science, at least in this one editorial. And obviously no single editorial is going to encompass the entirety of their views. They're like, these are organizations, they're full of different people, like things are more complex than that, but I just found that interesting. And the last article I want to talk about today, which is actually maybe kind of a complement to the previous one, this is an article from the LA Times titled "UC Berkeley is disavowing its eugenics research fund after bioethicists and other faculty call it out." This was written by Teresa Watanabe and it was published on October 26, 2020. So you may have heard that headline and you may have been like, what? Like eugenics research fund? And yeah, as the article describes, a professor named Osagi K. Obasogi was just looking through their emails and they saw this thing about a campus research fund and then realized that the research fund was the Genealogical Eugenic Institute Fund. I'm gonna say that I generally don't like to throw around phrases like, you know, I can't believe this sexist, racist thing is still happening in the year 2020, because like the truth of the matter is whatever progress we've made as humans, we're pretty slow about it, you know? Like, so it does not surprise me when you find out that there are still horrible racist things happening. But even with that, like, I was still kind of like, who uses the word eugenics in their eugenics things? Like, don't you, like what? But I think what this article did a good job of was like explaining like how research funds like this one are still kicking and have plenty of money. And you know, like they've, even if they don't have to change their name, like they found other ways to rebrand and kind of approach the eugenicist philosophy with, especially like with new technologies around gene editing. And this comes up with discussions around racism, but it's also definitely a big issue when we talk about disability rights as well. The badness of eugenics in that context is not new. It has been around for centuries. And just because we are changing the technologies with which we like use it does not mean that the badness changes. And so understanding the ways that eugenics manages to kind of shift the conversation, I think is going to be a really necessary thing as these new technologies like happen. Also, another side note, the article mentions several colleges that are like currently working on renaming buildings that are named after eugenicists, and that includes my undergrad, Caltech, which has a prominent building named for Robert A. Millikan, who led a eugenics group. Also, my dorm was named for a eugenicist, and like that's been delightful to learn about because Caltech has been dragging its feet for the past few months renaming these freaking dorms. They have like a whole committee to like sort out, what does the alumni want? What do students want? What should we be doing to rename the building? Just fucking rename the building. There's been a whole thing, like there is a student who is on like this renaming committee who basically left it because they said like, you know, we've been wasting time arguing about whether or not eugenics was bad and like whether it was just like a function of like its time and stuff. And like, yes, of course it's a function of its time. It was a function of a racist time. Rename the building. I don't know. I guess I don't run a campus, so maybe it's hard, but it seems like this is the lowest bar you should be able to clear in terms of, you know, being a decent campus, being a welcoming campus, being a place that doesn't honor eugenicists. Like, just rename the building. That's been really frustrating to watch as an alumni, and I really hope they figure their shit out because, you know, there are real students at Caltech whose lives are affected, you know, not by the name of the building, but by the way that Caltech treats and approaches race overall. And this is just like a symptom of that bigger problem. So yeah, that is my side note about that. Those are my recent science reads. I think there's kind of a spread of like science sucks sometimes to like science is really fucking awesome sometimes. We got, you know, dinosaur buttholes and vaccines on this end, and then like, you know, muddled scientific messaging and eugenics on the other, you know? So yeah, I think there should hopefully be something for everyone in here. And if there's anything you want to know more about, you know, in these articles, or if for like a future recent science reads, if there are any specific like topics that you're really curious about and you want me to keep an eye out for. And also if there's anything you want to like get a better handle on, like COVID related, let me know down below and I can try to point you to some articles that I think are useful. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Bye.